it's Autistic Bobby!
And I'm Fat Steve. And I'm the star of the show, Princess Sandra. And together, we're Spice and Media. Hi everybody, Fat Steve. Alexa, what time is it?
The time is 8:01 p.m.
So, it's 8:01 folks, so I can have a drink, and I've got a drink. And I'm here tonight to talk to you about HMP Kirkham. Now, I've been at Strange Ways for 15 months as a D category prisoner, in prison for tax fraud. So I probably should have gone to Kirkham within a month, 2 months max. So whilst I was there for 15 months, I was taken to reception 7 times with all my stuff, taken through reception, packed, ready, sat in a room to wait for a non-existent minibus to come and pick me up in a wheelchair. The only other way to get anywhere was in a sweatbox. I'd never been in a sweatbox in my life, and I really didn't want to go in one. So every time they tried to move me, something happened and the minibus didn't turn up. And as I said, this went on 7 times. So I was kept at Strange Ways all that time as a BCAT prisoner, when I should have been a DCAT prisoner. So this particular day I've been on a wing, a drug and alcohol wing, after I'd been attacked, where we were only let out for an hour a day. That was primarily because most of the people on that wing were drug and alcohol issues, and normally I would have been mentoring and helping them, but I was banged up for nearly 23 hours a day because there were 5 nonces on the wing, all on the ones where I was, and they couldn't come out if we were out. They couldn't even go out if the cleaners were out. So them last few weeks there at Strange Ways were very, very traumatic to me. I was very, very lonely, very mixed up. The phone didn't work, so I had no contact with my children or any of my friends outside. And probably twice it crossed my mind. I can't say the word, but it would have meant hurting myself, which wouldn't have been good, obviously. So there I am this day, and my canteen didn't come, and then a friendly officer from a wing that I'd been on before opened the door and gave me my canteen. It had been delivered to the wing where I used to be. Had a little chat with him, and he smiled and he said, "Off the record, I think you're going to Kirkham this week." And I said, "Yeah, that quite a few times now, and that's supposedly happened, and it never did." But anyway, this particular morning I get woken up, told to pack my stuff. I don't know where I'm going. They take me to reception. They book me through reception, everything again. They open the door, I walk through the screen and outside, and there is a sweatbox. And I was in a wheelchair. I could walk a little bit, but not too far. So the screw with the sweatbox, well, they're not screws, they're civvies, simply said, "Oh, we can't take you." I said, "I can climb up them steps, I assure you, if you've somewhere to put the wheelchair." So I ended up in a sweatbox. This was taking me to a D category prison, which is a bit odd. Anyway, off we go. I can see out this little hole in the window where years earlier I used to stand and take paparazzi photographs of people in the vans. Off it went along, heading towards Kirkham. So I had Winter Hill out the window, and the motorway, the M61, I think I could see, trundled along in through Preston and pulled in to Kirkham. Now the reception is it was a brand new building which was outside the perimeter fence, and I think they used to move people and put people in here just in case they tried to run off that night, then they would know that they weren't suitable. Anyway, I got out of the van and this bloke came up to me. He said, "Williams?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, we were told you'd no legs." I said, "Well, I've got legs." He said, "Yeah, we've been worried about where to put you because the story was there's a man coming today who's got no legs." So I said, "Well, I've got wheels." So I actually had like a walk-in push frame and a small wheelchair. So they got this con to push me from the reception out the back door, through an exercise yard, past the governor's mansion, which was a used sort of admin block where the governor, deputy governor and the boardroom was, along what I think had once been an old runway, right down to the virtual other end of the prison. And as we turned left, there was the library just across the way and the education block, and they took me to an almost new wing called C2, which was attached to healthcare. I was wheeled in there, I was given a nice cell. Within a few minutes I was taken to healthcare, where they did a full assessment on whether I was suitable to be there with the disabilities I had, and they were happy. And then this con came and said, "Williams?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I've got to take you to see somebody." So he wheeled me back along this old runway. I think it was an old runway, passing lots of things. There was a gym, a Bulls court, a giant chess set with 3-foot high chess pieces, a bowling green, and a koi pool with koi carp in it, which was beautiful, benches around it. And he took me to what he called the governor's mansion, which was this big building by the gatehouse, and he wheeled me in there. I'll turn right along a corridor, knocked on the door, opened it and wheeled me in. And this man sat behind a desk that I knew, because years earlier I'd stayed at my brother's a lot at Kirkham, and my nephew lived at Kirkham. And he wheeled me in, and this guy looked at me and he stood up and he said, "Welcome, Captain." I said, "Yeah." He says, "I'm the number 2 governor." Not going to say his name. He said, "We've been expecting you for a long time. You're a tax fraudster. This is where you should have been. But off the record, it was a directive from the Home Office and from Downing Street that you will stay in Strangeways for 15 months. I sat there and I thought, well, why is he telling me this? He said that, and then he got this decanter out and poured me a sherry. So we sat and we had a drink of sherry and reminisced on old times gone by. And he explained, "You stole off the government. You caused them a lot of trouble, a lot of hassle. They had to have lots of people hunting you down till they finally got you. And you've been made an example of for what happens when you steal money off the government." So we had a nice chat, and then this lad turned up and wheeled me back. The cell I was in was my own cell. It was nice furniture, although half of it had been stolen when I'd gone to the governor's mansion. And but there was everything there. There was a little telly, a clear telly that you could see through, that you can't hide things in them. And food was good, food was delivered, really high quality. So the next few days I had probation to go and see, healthcare again to go and see, all different departments, kit and uniform, lots and lots of paperwork to fill in, and that was that. It was nice. I was told I was going to get £10 a week, which is the disability rate, which I thought was okay. It was certainly more than Strangeways. Canteen was done in a sports hall. So I started wheeling myself around and having a look. I found a little block which just has 2 cells in it. So if people have done wrong, that's where they got took and then they got shipped out. Gym, as I said, Bulls Court, this giant chess set. The gardens area, masses and masses of sheds, all connected with the gardens, flower beds, greenhouses, beautiful, paradise folks, paradise. And a huge gym, which I could go in and have a look, but I couldn't really do anything, I was too ill. So I think it was day 2, and I had to wheel my way down to one of the admin block where some of the officers have a tea room. And as I pulled up at the front, I heard somebody laughing, and I turned round and there was another friendly face that I knew from Kirkham when I used to live there. And he looked, said, "Oh, come in my office, sit down in my office." And he said, "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" I said, "I could do with a power wheelchair, it's a long way up and down here." He said, "I can't manage that." He said, "I can get you another wheelchair, a better one than that." I said, "That'd be nice." So we had a little chat, he made a cup of tea and we had a bit of cake. And he says, "You disabled?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "So you're not working?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, technically this is a working prison, nearly everybody has a job, but on C2 where you are, you're free to be disabled and you'll still get looked after." But he said, would you like a job?" I said, "Well, doing what?" And he looked at me and he put his finger in his mouth and he said, "Let me think." He says, "You could be the disability liaison prisoner." I said, "Oh, right, what's that?" He said, "I don't know, I've just made it up." I went, "Oh." I said, "But I met a man yesterday who was the disability liaison officer. I think it was called Mr. Sparks. I don't know if he's still there. Nice chap." And I said, "But," he says, we could give you £30 a week." I said, "That really sounds nice." So I ended up getting me £30 a week and the £10 for being disabled. So after a couple of days, he asked me to go and see him again. I said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" He said, "Well, we have so much administration work here. What we'd like you to do is he said, "I've thought about this carefully for the last few days to think of something you can do. So when new prisoners come in every day up on the admin block, on the reception, you can go up there, meet people, look for other people with disabilities, look for elderly, and you can work with them and try and help them get decent accommodation that suits their disability, and you can arrange with the kitchens to get the food delivered and any other needs they have, basically." I said, "That's lovely." So the first day I get to reception, another member of staff tells me I can't go in. So I go back to this deputy governor who goes and puts them straight. So from that moment on, the lady officer, shall we say big butch lesbian, wasn't very happy because I'd gone to somebody overriding her. But eventually they started letting me in and doing my little job. So another thing we had at Kirkham was an over 50s club. So there were 2 other trustees, a bit like me, that run the over 50s club. and everybody could go in there. There were some younger people there. We could sit and have a brew and have a chat and have some biscuits, and it was like a little social club. Met lots and lots of people in there similar to me, tax fraudsters, VAT fraudsters the same, and two guys that had a huge building company, and they were demolishing a building. They had cameras around it, they had 8-foot fences around it, they had movement detectors. But one night 2 young boys managed to break in and scale and get inside. One of them fell and died. And these 2 guys that had done everything they could in their power to keep the place safe, they got 3 years each, but they sent them straight to Kirkham. Another guy, he stole a lot more than me in VAT. He was there, he was still quite rich, he'd paid his pocker, and he still had a big business outside. So there were a lot of business people there that were quite okay, quite nice. Then I would keep getting called in to see my governor boss. He'd say, right, there's meetings today at the governor's mansion and I need you to go in and take notes from me. So I get to this building and I'm shown into what was called the boardroom, and the number 1 governor was sat at the top of the table, and 4 or 5 other governors and other senior members of staff, and they're looking at me, but they knew who I was, and I was quite shocked. So we had the meeting talking about the issues. Oh, we've got a car alarm now, that's all we need. Talking about the issues, and then towards the end they had some security things to deal with, so I had to leave. I became a listener. So with the Samaritans, I would go to that same building every 2 weeks, I think it was, and all the listeners, we would get chocolate biscuits, cakes, cups of tea, cups of coffee, everything. It was a nice informal meeting where we talked about some of the issues with some of the prisoners that we had. Now, I met a guy once. My boss said, this guy's he's in for a section 18, which is wounding with intent, but he's 70 odd years old and he's a bit, shall we say, not all there, and can you try and mentor him for him and look after him and keep an eye on him? So I sat with this guy for a few times. He told me a few stories and he kept talking about Dougie, his friend Dougie, and he explained that when he'd been at school he'd written a book, and he's talking about, I wrote this book, he says, and my friend Dougie stole my book. And I was, yeah, and it's just going in one ear and out the other ear like it does. And he says, it was a rather special book and it's rather famous today. I said, all right. I says, it's about some mice that controlled the world, and it just suddenly clicked that what he was talking about was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So I did a little digging. I knew that a guy called Dougie had written it, which was Douglas Adams. I talked to him about it. He told me he'd gone to school with Douglas Adams and he had wrote a book, and he claimed that Douglas Adams had stolen it and published it. Whether he had or not, we don't know. The guy was a bit backloot fruity. On 2 occasions I had to go. He had adjudications for issues and problems and I had to go and represent him. In my capacity as disability liaison, I'd have to route round everywhere and find ramps and access problems, and then make written recommendations for changes. Probably about 20, nothing ever got done. So there were places where there were steps and where you couldn't get in, and there were places with doors that were too narrow that you couldn't get in. So all good intentions to do things, but they didn't always work out. One lad, he'd been in 22 years, and all he did all day, whenever you saw him, was boast about when he gets parole, he's going to go out, he's going to find this guy that grassed him up, and he's going to kill him. And that's all he went on about, day in, day out. Every time he bumped into him, he says, I'm out in a month, and I'm out. Anyway, come the day, he gets released. A week later, it's in the newspaper. Prisoner, released from Kirkham, comes out, murders his accuser from nearly 30 years ago. So the signs are always there, folks, but people don't always pick up on them. Another strange one day, really odd. A guy, and I can't remember his name, he'd come from HMP Ford, and he had a China tea set and some antique boxes and things that he'd carried with him. I can't say his name even if I remembered him, because I was listening and mentoring him, but he claimed to have been the longest serving prisoner in the British prison system, some 35 years. Again, you don't know what's real and what's not, but the officers were different with him than everybody else. They showed him that respect that you would show somebody that had been in that long. They'd sent him to Kirkham for the last 2 years to try and get him to be able to come out. If you understand, when he went in, there were no phones, no internet, no nothing. So how on earth they expect to try and change his view of the world? I mean, to him, a wife was a slave at home that brought the children up and did the washing and the ironing and the cleaning, and he wouldn't have been able to survive in the world today. Another lad, probably 40 years old, knocks on my door this day. He goes, Captain, can I talk to you? I said, what's the matter? He says, what's Wi-Fi, mate? And I looked at him and I went, what? He said, what's Wi-Fi? Now you imagine you've been in prison so long, you don't know what Wi-Fi is, which means he doesn't know what the internet is. He doesn't know that there's no gas board shop anymore. There's no electric board shop. You don't go and pay your gas and electric bill. There's no council offices. You don't go and pay your rates. Everything's done online. And I looked at him, I could feel myself filling up, and I said, I've got an appointment in half an hour, can you come back after? And he went, and I shut the door, and I stood there and I cried, thinking that this guy's been in jail so long. What chance does he stand of integrating back into society? Virtually no chance. No chance. So this particular day, I'm on the bowling green, I'm on the edge of it, and this old guy comes down on a stick. And I said, he says, I've just got here. I said, I'm sorry, I'll be up and see you later and I'll sort your food and things out. And you remember, you see these people with love and hate on the knuckles. He'd got love and hate on his knuckles. He was probably 80, 85 years old. And you couldn't read it. It was that old and wrinkled. And he sat there and he's just saying, it's lovely here, isn't it? I said, yeah. I said, how long have you been in? He said, 28 years. I said, well, right. He said, 28 years, and this is the first freedom I've had. So, just out of curiosity, I just said, my God, mate, where did it go wrong? And he looked at me and he put his hand on my knee and he says, I was 7. And I thought, fucking hell, what on earth have I done here? I said, right. He says, I was 7 and I come home from school, went in the kitchen, and there's a man with his head in the oven, and the house smelled of gas, and he was dead. And he said, I run next door to get Mrs. Prosser, and she come in and she turned the gas off, and we opened the windows. He said, and then we went in the lounge, and he'd murdered my mother, and he'd chopped her up, and her arms and her legs and her body were on the floor, on the Yorkshire stone floor, and her head were on the fire. She said, and I stood there and I looked, and her hair's gone and she's melting. And I thought, crap, I've got to get away from that. I just went, whoa, Mo mate. I said, I'm really sorry, that wasn't a good start in life. No, he says, no, it weren't that. And I thought, what the? He says, they sent me to live with my father. He said, and he started abusing me from being about 10, and he was selling me and I thought, what have I done here? And I managed to escape. But there were some other people that had been in jail a hell of a long time. Again, he was only there about 4 or 5 days and he couldn't handle it. He kept wandering just beyond the gate, and it was a risk, not to anybody else but to himself. Chatted to him, I think the day before he went, and he explained that he'd got jailed for murdering his father, and he'd murdered 2 other people whilst he was in jail, 2 nonces. So he'd killed 3 people, but been in so long and didn't know. He's probably still in, probably still there. So the different jobs I had as this disability liaison prisoner. I was saying about the over 50s club. There were lots of paperwork involved with that, and then the governor that I used to help, I'd go and have a meeting with him every week. I'd give him copies of what been said in meetings that he wasn't in. The listeners, so many other things that I just can't really remember. Towards the end, I was sometimes taken to the block to be a listener and a mentor with some people that had been caught doing something wrong that were due to go back to bang up. That was a bit harrowing, a bit distressing, a bit strange. After the freedom I'd had for the 11 months I was there, it was odd just to suddenly be back in a little cell. Although it was in a small building, when you were in it, and it had bars, and it was just the same as being in any other cell. There was a lady there, I hope she's still with us, called Miss Kinner. Anybody that's been to Kirkham will remember Miss Kinner. Probably 60 odd, nearly 70-year-old, and she was still working, and she was infamous, famous for catching phones and drugs. Very, very sharp, very clued up. Nobody could ever get anything from behind her back. She was so good. She took me to hospital once before I was allowed to go out on my own. She escorted me to hospital and told me a few stories about the prison years ago. So anybody that's ever been to Kirkham, I hope you can remember her. I said she was probably 60 odd, nearly 70. I once seen her run and there's this guy twice the size of me, and she jumped and rugby tackled him to get a phone out of his hand. Quite lucky nobody ever killed her, to be honest. So coming towards the end of my sentence, I was counting down the days. I think it was August 2007 when I got released. My governor friend took me down to the building by the gatehouse, ready to go. I wasn't searched, things were okay. We had a little chat, and then my son James picked me up, and he didn't know that we had CDs and things in prison, so he thought I'd not listened to music for a long time, and he'd made me a lovely playlist of the Moody Blues, Alan Parsons Project, other things. Still lots and lots of other stories, but there just isn't time and then my memory's just failing so bad now I can't remember them all. If something comes to me, I'll drop it in another video. So for now, folks, this has been VAT Steve at Spices Media, telling you some of the stories from HMP Kirkham, which is in between Blackpool and Preston. A nice decat prison. So for now, I'll catch you all later, folks. Keep safe. VAT Steve, Spices Media. Bye, everybody. Who's that? Who's that moving in the hall? Somebody's setting off the buzzer. Let 'em in.
Hi everybody, it's Autistic Bobby!
And I'm VAT Steve. And I'm the star of the show, Princess Sandra. And together, we're Spices Media.